Chorus for Saturday, August the 16th. I'm Bernard Hickey for the Kaka. This is my daily podcast and video that goes out via my email newsletter on Substack. It's called The Kaka, and it's all about Aotearoa's political economy around housing, climate, and poverty. Today, I'd like to talk about our infrastructure and population crisis, and I'd also like to talk about the results of this long running bipartisan approach of not using the Crown's balance sheet to pay for infrastructure to prepare, let alone deal with our incredibly fast population growth. So let's talk about something that's in your news here today. This is at the heart of the problem. We have an adversarial relationship and broken financial relations between the central government and the local government. This matters because any road, any school, any new suburb, any houses only get built when both central and local government agree and contribute funding for it. And since 1989, when our councils were reformed, they've not been allowed to run deficits, and they're encouraged to not borrow much at all. In fact, most of them have incredibly strong credit ratings, but don't use them to borrow to pay for infrastructure. And the government itself often gets itself into a war of words with councils, which means they're accusing each other of not doing things and doing things, not working together, not building that infrastructure. The councils believe they don't benefit from population growth, and that really does mean that they both say that it's your fault and you pay. Meanwhile, the government goes ahead and enables lots more migration of people on, particularly on temporary work visas, many of whom are exploited and many of whom try to get residency here. Sometimes they don't get it, sometimes they do. And this fundamental conflict at the heart of our planning system, our political economy, is why our housing is too expensive and we have so many problems. Now, just another example, a piece out today from Tim Murphy at Newsroom reporting on how the Auckland Council is in open revolt at the government's plans to essentially force councils to do the thing the government wants, to cap rates, to stop them doing things, but of course not to fund them. And this open conflict, a lack of resolution of this funding issue between councils and governments just carries on. So here's Wayne Brown. He essentially has told the government to get stuffed over its legislation called the Local Government Systems Improvement Amendment Bill. And he's not the only one. Chris Darby is a councillor at the Auckland Council. And he's quoted by Tim Murphy as saying, "It's the local government, especially Auckland and its people, neutering bill because it neuters this council and its communities. There's a lot in this bill that is kicking mud in the face of not just this council, but the people of Auckland." And if you look in the email newsletter today, you can see other examples of where the government has cut funding for councils, increased requirements for work, forcing the councils to take on extra costs, and the government doesn't contribute to it. So there's a real disconnect here between government saying, do this, and we're not going to fund it. And then when council tries to fund it, the government says, don't do that, don't put up rates because we don't want that. And this lack of this incredibly big power imbalance is unusual. The rest of the world, Australia, for example, states and local councils have a lot more funding independence and are therefore able to pay for a lot of this infrastructure to cope with population growth. Now, what happens when you have incredibly restrictive planning rules, in part because of this funding conflict between council and government, and you have a free marketeering set of governments of the last 30 years allowed lots of takeovers and mergers to create monopolies? So yesterday we got selected prices information for July. So this is food, transport, rents, that sort of thing, not the whole CPI. And you can see here that there is a close relationship between food prices in in the supermarkets and what's happening with commodity prices globally in New Zealand dollar terms. So, very close correlation. However, you can see sometimes there's a gap. So the dark line is the New Zealand prices in the supermarkets. The yellow line is what's happening to global food prices. And the gap obviously is higher profit margins. We saw a lot of that through 2022 and 2023. And in the last 12 months, we've seen another surge in food prices. And you can see the gap is opening up there again. Commodity prices have actually flattened out in recent months, but those food prices are flowing through. And it's clearly one of the reasons why there's so much unhappiness with our supermarkets. Whether the government does anything, we'll see. And the other big issue here, of course, for those people who are frustrated that they can't buy a house, the rent's too high, the congestion's too much, no one seems to be doing anything. We see a significant number of people leaving New Zealand to live in Australia, where now there is an unemployment rate of 4.2%. This week, we saw the unemployment rate in Australia fall from 4.3%, whereas our unemployment rate's risen from 5.2 to 5.3. Why does that matter? Because there's an incredibly close correlation between the gap between Australia's unemployment rate and New Zealand's unemployment rate, i.e., if Australia's unemployment rate is lower than ours, i.e., it's easy to get a job, then a lot of people go. And that's what we're seeing now. And this widening of the gap from 80 basis points to 100 basis points, as reported in the last week, shows the pressure is still on for New Zealanders to leave. Now, you may wonder, hang on a minute, I thought we had net migration. So if all of the New Zealanders are leaving, what's happening on the other side? Well, we're getting a lot of people coming in from overseas who are on temporary work visas, and the government in the last week has loosened rules on temporary work visas again for agricultural contractors and for workers here seasonally. Again, not making it easy for people to find homes and the like. And if you think it's not just about the unemployment rate, you can see here wage growth over the last 20 years or so between Australia and New Zealand. Again, the gap opening up there, the yellow line ahead of the blue line, that means wages in Australia rising faster than New Zealand. And again, the gap is opened up there. And this is an unending flow of people out, replaced by people coming in who can't get into Australia and often get their residency in New Zealand and bounce into Australia. And that's something to keep an eye on. Now, the other thing is there's obviously a lot of New Zealanders in Australia who have student loans. And when you're overseas and you've got a student loan, you have to pay interest on it, whereas here it's interest free. These are the stats from IRD on the number of people living overseas with a student loan who have overdue repayments. And it's upwards of 70,000 people. Now, normally, if you want to come back and visit your family and you've got a bit of a student loan, you're not going to get arrested at the airport. Well, the IRD is getting really grumpy. The case reported today in the New Zealand Herald Te Amo Matangi, age 49, who's been in Australia for 21 years. So left very young, had a student loan, paid it off, but then did some extra courses, had a $13,000 debt when she left to go and live in Australia, didn't repay it. It's now $56,000. Just this week, she arrived in Christchurch for a family event and was arrested at the airport and is in prison. This is an awful situation. One way to get a whole bunch of New Zealanders home would be to forgive that debt. And you wonder why people are leaving and not coming back. That is an awful story there. And today's must read, I've included the link in the email newsletter, is of the case of a man in New Plymouth who is paralysed after an accident. He went into a motel after he came out of the Burwood Spinal Unit. He'd been there for 4 years in New Plymouth. Despite applying for a state house with access for wheelchairs, 4 years. It cost $220,000 to put him up in this hotel. It took 2 years to build a ramp and a cover for him to be able to get in and out of a car without getting wet. And just a symptom again of our inability to build enough housing, particularly for people with disabilities, because this is not something the private sector does. Another example of a market failure and a lack of investment, combined with way too much population growth, where the benefits of that growth go to the central government in the form of GST and income tax, and the costs of it are lumped on consumers, but also on councils. And that's why they refuse to allow things. It took 2 years to get a consent for this disability um, alterations on the State House in New Plymouth. And one of the issues he found living in the motel was that this heat pump did not have a remote. So every time he needed to change the heat pump, he had to get out of bed, get into his wheelchair, and go across the other side of the room to change it. And when he had his son over to stay, they had to sleep in the same bed. So this new place he's going into has 2 bedrooms, which is good. I'm Bernard Hickey. That was today's Daily Chorus for Saturday, August the 16th. Ka kite anō.